Welcome to episode 188 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian starting my 16th year in school libraries, I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Friends, today's episode marks the beginning of season 5. And if you had told me back in August of 2018 that I would be sitting here recording episode 188, I don't think I would have believed you. I would have appreciated that information 4 years ago, but I'll tell you what, I have not gotten here without a great deal of help and support from an amazing group of school librarians who each week step up and bring together all their resources that they have to be able to support our larger listening community. And if you're tuning in, I am so grateful that you do every week. I'm so grateful that you share this resource with fellow school librarians in your district and in your remote and in your in-personal PLN. It really has made a difference to those who tune in, and they let me know each week. It's wonderful to hear from listeners. But I'm so grateful. So I looked back on season 4, and I really feel incredibly grateful because I was able to interview guests, school librarians from 24 different states, as well as the District of Columbia, as well as Canada and Great Britain and Australia. And I thought it might not be a bad idea right now to just give you an idea of what kinds of goals I have for this podcast. Not only are these ones that have been driving my, interest each week, but also ones that continue to be in place. And I wanted to let you know, first and foremost, this podcast is committed to making sure that we lift the voices of school librarians everywhere. We are committed to that. And I say we because I don't do this alone. Each week I have guests who join me. I want to make sure that this podcast is always representing the issues and the needs that we share, oftentimes in our different spaces. I want to make sure that we represent all different grade levels. I do appreciate when we can distribute all of those interests across our K-12 and also into our collegiate, our people who are working in the college level and also with our pre-service school librarians. I want to make sure that we give time and space and an opportunity to discuss the circumstances that we oftentimes face and the shared struggles that we have. I want to make sure that we're always providing a thought-provoking conversation, something that gives all of us a time to reflect, and especially to provide deep dives into topics which are always and 100% going to be dedicated to our space, to our collections, the roles that we serve in our school communities, and as well as to the issues that are pertinent to our profession. I want to make sure that this podcast is both a resource as well as a repository for the curated resources which have been brought together so generously by our talented guests. And I want to make sure that we are continuing to build that community of professionals. It's a listening community, true, but it's a community that's committed to supporting one another week in and week out. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Stephanie in North Carolina, Matt in Colorado, Karina, Miranda, and Jennifer in Texas, and Jordan in Washington, D.C. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Season 5 is brought to you by our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. Friends, in a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. Today, I would like to feature a really great series, which I'm excited about because, for several reasons, actually. And this series, and there'll be a dedicated link in the show notes, friends, is called Far Out Fairy Tales. Now, there are 24 books in this series, and I've seen a couple of them because the series started actually in 2015, but there are new titles continuing to be added, and I'm very excited about this for a couple reasons. First of all, this is a graphic novel collection, and we are always trying to satisfy that need from our students. In this case, it's got a reading level of approximately 3rd and 4th grade with an interest level going up to 6th grade. And there are actually 24 books in this series. Each book is approximately 40 pages long. And I do want to read the promo here. What do you get when classic fairy tales are twisted around, turned inside out, and reworked for the graphic novel format? Far Out Fairy Tales. Discover what Snow White would be like if she were raised by robots. Find out how Cinderella's story plays out when she walks the path of the ninja. Chase down the big bad wolf with the help of superpowered Red Riding Hood and more. Each retelling stays true to the spirit of the original while adding a modern spin. And a guide to the Far Out twist and other bonus material allow young readers to learn more about the traditional story. Experience favorite fairy tales like never before with this innovative series of full-color comic books for kids, and live awesomely ever after. And friends, this is fun because, again, the struggle when we're trying to provide graphic novels for our students is to make sure that they are appropriate and they are books that we can have confidence in offering to our students. And especially when Capstone is providing these, we know that scrutiny has already been put into the creation of these storylines and the depictions and the art, which is done well. And I will say, friends, buy a couple of these, and when you see what you've got, I'm sure you'll want to invest in some more. So friends, some of the following titles would be Beauty and the Dreaded Sea Beast, Dr. Pied Piper and the Alien Invasion. We've also got The Frog Prince Curse and The Ghost Emperor's New Clothes, as well as Goldilocks and the Three Vampires, Hansel and Gretel and Zombies, Super Billy Goat's Gruff, Three Blind Mice, Race for Revenge, as well as The Three Little Flying Pigs, Thumbelina, Wrestling Champ, are just a few of the fantastic titles in this series. Capstone has generously offered listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, #Library Twitter, and my conversation with Shannon Steimel. Friends, I'm so excited. Shannon Steimel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Amy. I am a big fan of this podcast. So when I heard on your ISTE episode that you wanted help with library Twitter, I decided to step up, in part because I often propose to present things on things that I want to find out more about. And when I returned to library Twitter after a couple of years of not being on Twitter so much and announced that I was coming back to the library, it was like crickets. So I thought I better find out what's going on.
Awesome. Well, and it does take a certain amount of commitment when you say, I'm going to be on this platform. If you want, and I'm just finding this is in my sort of amateur understanding of social media. If you want people to follow you on social media, you have to contribute to social media. And that is, it really does go both ways. People don't just gravitate to you for no reason. So let's get started. First of all, friends, I'd love to know, Shannon, tell us where in the country you work. Tell us about your library program and what your schedule is going to be like starting in the fall.
Sure. So I am starting a new adventure as a pre-K to 5 librarian in a large district in Metro St. Louis. That's after being back in the ELA classroom for 3 years. Previously to that, I was in a 6 through 12 library at a charter school. So I have the library experience, but not that experience with the littles. So you better believe I've been re-listening to your podcast, and those episodes about the littles have been an invaluable resource to me.
Can I just say, as somebody who has just begun my career as a high school librarian, I miss the days of kids who are device free, who don't have earbuds permanently affixed to their bodies. They don't have a phone on them. I've yet to meet an elementary school where the kids were allowed to have their phones with them on their person at all times. You're not going to get many 4-year-olds who want to scroll their Instagram instead of listening to you. And you are in for a treat. And I am glad you're listening to those episodes, because when I recorded them, I made sure to find people who were passionate about being elementary and teaching our littles. And again, you're going to find so many reasons to love working with these little guys. God help you, though, you're going to be tying a lot of shoelaces. So
yeah, you kind of scared me a little bit when it came to tears and potty accidents and that kind of thing. But it's so funny that you mentioned the phones, because they had me come and do a guest lesson with 5th grade class. And that was like the biggest thing that I realized is, oh my gosh, there were no cell phones out. Like there may be other, discipline issues or management issues in the elementary library, but thankfully the cell phone is not one of them.
Yeah, I will try to talk to my high schoolers and think they're ignoring me. Oh, they're not ignoring me. They're just listening to their earbuds, and they physically can't. I mean, it doesn't matter that I'm talking to them. They can't hear me at all. I'm like, this is a dangerous situation. If we had to go into lockdown, half of these kids wouldn't know what was going on. So
yeah, I found like gesturing to your ear, like take the earbud out, like you have to get in front of them and gesture to your ear.
Again, you sort of pick your poison, and truly there are reasons to celebrate students at every age. And the fact is you're going into this eyes wide open. And these episodes, when we record them, you are getting a very authentic understanding of what this is like. I've yet to see somebody who appears on the show and is committed to sugarcoating any experience whatsoever. I think that is so important, because I'm very aware there are a lot of listeners who are actually right now just contemplating getting that degree. They're in the classroom. They're like, you know what? Maybe I should listen to what it's like to be a school librarian, because I think that's a great way to decide if this is the kind of change that sounds exciting. And, I did elementary for 14 years. And again, you're in for an adventure, but you already know more than most people do walking into those situations.
Yeah, I am excited about my new adventure for sure. And, when I decided to go into library, it actually just started as I was an ELA teacher and I needed to get a master's degree. And I thought, well, what will help me become a better English teacher? I think I need to learn more about research papers and that kind of thing. And then when I got into my actual library classes, I just fell in love with the whole idea. And it's definitely my passion. So I'm very excited to be returning to my passion for this school year.
Fantastic. So friends, I was doing some digging into Shannon's blog, and friends, of course, I'll include it in the show notes. And I noticed something. You are the 2018-2019 Greater St. Louis School Librarian Association Library Media Specialist of the Year. Would you please share with us, what was it about you and your program that got the attention of the award committee? Because this isn't a district. This is like a whole, metro area. What an amazing accolade to have, and this would have been when you were in your high school library, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So thank you, Amy, first of all, for that recognition. So the first thing I want to say is I had a colleague nominate me. And I know from listening to you, Amy, that you encourage librarians to nominate themselves and go out for things. And, you know, that's part of the reason why I raised my hand for this episode, even though I'm not, you know, like a major Twitter influencer, is because if you don't go forward, then you're not going to be recognized. So that's the first thing I would say about it. My colleague who did nominate me, she talked a lot about the student-led culture of literacy that I had created at the school that I was at, and how I really tried to level the playing field for my students in terms of access to books and digital access, particularly because I was working with a school that has high poverty.
Well, so I'm curious. Give us a little taste. When building your culture of literacy, was there something that resonated with your students in particular? I just want to give you a chance to brag, because
Sure.
if you got nominated and you won this, you really nailed a couple really fantastic programs, and listeners are always looking to learn. What kind of things did you do to increase that culture of literacy in your school?
Sure. So the first thing is I started a teen library council, and we met once a month at lunch. They weren't normally allowed to eat in the library for lunch, but once a month they had permission to come and meet and eat, and I would give them a little treat on their way out. That was kind of like where I'd take attendance and give them their treat. And that was my chance to have that captive audience to say, like, here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys want to do? And so they were able to really say, like, what things they were interested in. We also did things like taking book selfies where they would pose with their book that they liked. We would have book to movie viewings after school sometimes, where I would show a movie that had been based on a book, and we would do a little book club kind of thing. So just a lot of work just trying to get the books into their hands. And then in the last year that I was there, I also through a partnership I had with the Innovative Technology Education Fund of St. Louis, I was able to bring hotspots and Chromebooks into the library that were available for checkout overnight for the students. And at that time, the school was not one-to-one. And as I mentioned, being a high poverty school, a lot of them needed access to that. So that was prior to the pandemic, but those were two of the things that I think helped. And then, you know, I think I also garnered attention because of my work as a local ed tech leader. I would say that that's something I've always been involved in as a librarian. And I even hosted my own mini Zoom conference in 2018 and 2019 that was the St. Louis School Library Year in Review, and interviewed some of the award winners that were local to St. Louis. And you can actually still watch those videos on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and I plan to get that going again for this upcoming school year.
Would you please make sure to share those links in the show notes? Because again, these kinds of, when listeners can see exactly what you're talking about, these ideas, anything that we can do to raise that profile of what we do is going to be a win, whether you're in St. Louis or you're outside the United States. These are programs which, if replicated, in no way diminish the fact that you did this, but the fact that it catches on in other areas is really exciting. You know, friends, it's fun. Shannon has already mentioned this episode is a listener request, a recent listener request, and I know that this listener is far from alone in feeling about Twitter. And I will just say what the listener wrote. The listener DM'd me and said, silly idea for an episode, how to actually manage your Twitter and build it up. LOL, I feel like all the guests mention how important Twitter is for building a PLN, and I can't figure this thing out. Ha ha ha. End quote. And friends, I feel the frustration that this listener has, and I am far from being an expert. In fact, we can all go back and figure out the day we joined Twitter and realize, wow, I may have been on Twitter, but I wasn't actually participating in Twitter and engaging in Twitter. And I think that there's an important distinction between being on the platform and participating on the platform. So, I'm just grateful that you're here.
I totally agree with that. I think if you think of it as networking rather than just being on social media, that it's not about building a large following, it's about the quality of the interactions. Think about what that means in real life. I was an only child, and so I live in my head a lot, and I have trouble making friends from when I was little on. And so when I became a librarian and realized how isolating that is, I really had to push myself out of my comfort zone to be good, if good at making acquaintances, if not at, making friends. And so, I really have looked at this and built my Twitter up from kind of starting locally, like what teachers in my district were on Twitter, what educators in my region and librarians in my region were on Twitter. I mentioned that, a lot of my first interaction on Twitter actually was ed tech related and not necessarily librarian related. But if you're just now starting out, one of the things I would suggest is I'm sure that your state library association has a Twitter that you can follow, and not just follow them, but take a look at their followers and see, who you can follow that is in your region. That's a great way to start those Twitter interactions. And I think another big way that I've become more involved throughout the years is using Twitter for conferences and interacting, not just at the conference as a back channel, although I love that, but also in anticipation of a chat. When I found out that Dr. Kristen Matson was coming to St. Louis for a conference, I was tagging her in Twitter before she came. When she got here, I was running up to her and fangirling her and getting a picture of the two of us for Twitter and tweeting about her sessions. And so, I really made a connection with her, and that's the kind of thing that I've tried to replicate over and over again, not just with, bigger names, but, anytime you see a great speaker at a conference, make a connection with them. If you're participating in a webinar, if there's someone makes a really good point that you want to echo, then you can, join in and reply to them on Twitter, retweet them on Twitter. So I really encourage, making those connections. And then, of course, we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but connecting to the larger librarian community on Twitter via hashtags and chats and through some of the, Twitter influencers in the library world.
Well, and you bring up some really great strategies. Another thing I've noticed that's for me, a very sort of nice sort of entry point to establishing the reading that you're doing is to, when I read, and I'm reading a great deal right now because I am entering the world of YA, after a long stint being in elementary. And what I would do is I would take pictures of the book I just read. And in this case, for me, it's usually an audiobook screenshot, which to me is another whole way of expanding your reach on Twitter, because that whole hashtag audiobook and is really a lot of fun. And, so what I would do is I would just take a screenshot of the audiobook, and those are always eye-catching. Anytime you can create that image, that people say, oh, wow, that's a book I'd like to read. But then do the extra step of including the handle of the author. And you say, wait a minute, I don't know the author's handle. Well, of course you don't know the author's handle. We're going to look it up now, and the fun thing for me is, especially I've been able to do this a lot in the summer, is that little rabbit hole of learning about the author, because you're going to their official webpage, you're finding their social media handles, and making sure that when you talk about a book that you've obviously enjoyed and you have feelings about, not only including, mentioning the author by handle, but then also including a hashtag YA lit, hashtag MG lit, hashtag kid lit. There are a lot of lit handles that you can put in there that a lot of people are interested in following, especially if you're moving into an area of library that that requires you to broaden that reading experience that you're having. So I know that's something for me, that's a fun way for me to build out Twitter. And people are like, oh, wait, this person teaches fill in the blank, high school. This person teaches elementary. I'm going to follow them because I want to see the other suggestions that they make. Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful. So, I love that you talk about expanding, like thinking about your Twitter universe locally, regionally, district, state, and nationally. And if I could respond to the listener's observation, it's often on Twitter where I meet the school librarians who eventually record episodes with me. It makes sense though, because these are the people I learn more about because we follow each other on Twitter.
Yeah, Amy, that's how we met, was following each other on Twitter. And I think, the thing about Twitter is you really have to find your niche. And, there's an average of 6,000 tweets per second across all of Twitter. So if you're just trying to break into Twitter, that's probably not going to happen unless you're already a celebrity. But finding that niche is important. And there's different Twitter niches too. It's really interesting. Like my wife is a poet, and there's a whole poet Twitter that she is a part of. And during the pandemic, she started following med Twitter because she wanted to know what the doctors were saying about the pandemic. She almost died of double lung failure prior to the pandemic. So you can imagine that a respiratory pandemic scared the heck out of us. And so, I feel like, she was able to keep us alive from following med Twitter. So, it is a matter of finding your niche within Twitter. And there are definitely some specific hashtags that I would recommend. But I think that it's also just a matter of not necessarily trying to break into, becoming the big Twitter influencer in library, but also just forming your own little community. There's a really interesting episode of The Hidden Brain called The Snowball Effect, where he talks about how social media has influence, and it compares how a virus like COVID-19 spreads compared to how something goes viral online. And one of the things that he was talking about is how Twitter itself started off very much as neighborhoods, and jumped across the country because people had gone to college together in this other part. And when Oprah tweeted about it, yes, she, got a bunch of people to follow Twitter after that as well. But she was just kind of riding the avalanche that had already started happening. And it also talks about the Black Lives Matter hashtag and how that became very influential, particularly during the Ferguson hashtag Ferguson, which is local to me, but I'm sure, everyone knows that. But it was interesting because the episode was talking about how it went from the people who were using the Black Lives Matter hashtag pushed back with the media that was posting and said things like, why are you calling it a mob? Why are you not calling it citizens protesting? Why are you not including that he was a recent high school graduate? And so, things like that then started to infiltrate the media coverage of the Ferguson events and Black Lives Matter hashtag.
And friends, we'll make sure anytime we reference stuff, I love listening to Hidden Brain, and I'll be happy to put that link in the show notes. I want to, you mentioned a couple things, and especially about our bios. When we put ourselves out there, we have an opportunity to share or not share with people who are on Twitter things in a small space about ourselves. And for me, this is very telling. And I look at a lot of people's bios, especially when I am looking for guests to be on the show. And because we have to be so selective in how many characters we use in our bio, we have to be very And obviously some people who are sort of like, oh, I love coffee. And you're like, okay, well, there's a lot of coffee drinkers, but you can see there's a lot of intentionality in the wording because we have such a small space to use to describe ourselves in the way that we are hoping other people will identify us. We use identifiers because we want to build that community. If we leave things out of that bio, it's because that is perhaps not something that we feel is an identifier for ourselves. And you mentioned the word niche, and I remember going back to way early days of being a podcaster in season 1, and I wouldn't call them naysayers, but people are like, so you're doing a podcast about school librarians, isn't that really niche? And I said, no, like I'm going to create a community of school librarians. Well, then only school librarians are listening to you. And I said, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the Twitter and how immense it is, you can narrow that down real quick using those hashtags. You can define the community that is likely to see what you are sharing by using hashtags, which will bring it all to a very, very controlled environment, but you're narrowing down the number of people, on Twitter writ large who will see what you post on Twitter. If you use certain hashtags, if you are intentional about what you put in your bio, if you're intentional about what you tweet out, you're going to very, very closely define who's going to actually see what you put out there.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a good point, that you are, narrowing the focus. But, in the current climate that we have with challenges to school library books and school books, I actually just saw a tweet recently. Joy Ann, a librarian from Indiana, tweeted about groups using social media tweets against teachers in central Indiana. And she was doing this while retweeting a post about Moms for Liberty and allied groups training members to monitor teachers' social media, in addition to reviewing school library books and researching proposing legislation. So I think that climate is definitely something to be aware of when you decide to, post to Twitter and what you put in your bio, those kind of things. And I'm not saying don't post. As you can see, if you look at my Twitter, I have the rainbow right there in my name because I want you to know that I am part of the LGBT community and I want to protect my marriage to my wife and I want to protect queer kids as they're growing up and support all kinds of families.
How we define ourselves in our bio, this isn't something we're casual about. It is something that we think long and hard about. At least I sure did, because it's important to me that people realize who is putting out the content that I am. And I got to tell you, Joyanne's been on this show 3 times. I know Joyanne. I've met Joyanne at ISTE 19, and she's an amazing contributor to this podcast. And, the truth of the matter is that organizations are going to weaponize social media. The only good news is that the librarians are just as good at disseminating and using these social media platforms to mobilize the same kind of sort of create those sort of ways to disseminate the information. We're experts at curating that information. We're going to get it out into the hands of people who can use it. So when we put things on social media to counter the actions that people are using, they are using social media, but we are using social media too. And I say weaponize because that is exactly what it becomes in the hands of people who want to reach and impact the largest number of people possible. It doesn't mean that we can't do the same thing. And I agree. There are consequences for putting things out there, and it doesn't matter whether you're on Instagram, whether you're on Facebook, or you're on Twitter. I'm sure there's some retaliation on TikTok. As somebody who doesn't use TikTok, I don't know, but I am guessing that when people want to be unkind, they can find a social media platform to do that. Our goal is to use this platform for good.
Yeah, I see some librarians who've actually turned their accounts private, and that really discourages me to think that, people are being scared into that. Not to judge them at all, because, treat your social media how you want to treat it. But, I feel like now is the time to organize and advocate for the things that we care about. And if you haven't checked out the hashtag freedom, where the middle part is spelled like read, definitely check that out.
Friends, what we're going to do include in the show notes is also we sort of are crowdsourcing a lot of the hashtags and handles that we've used commonly, and I'll make sure to include those in the show notes, and feel free to add yourself to those. But, you mentioned the need to protect our accounts from people who seek to use them as very targeted against individuals. And I've spoken to a couple individuals recently, because the targets have been, the attacks have been very personal. And they have been directed towards individuals, not the profession of librarians. And anytime somebody wants to come after a profession or group of people, I realize it perhaps we sort of bear that burden because we all belong to that profession. But when the haters come after people individually, I think that you should be very aware of who is seeing what you put out there. And when I talk to people who've changed the settings on their accounts, they're like, look, I need to do this for a little while. And it's not forever, but I need to do this for a little while, because right now I just don't feel it's very healthy for me to see the things that are being put out there about me. I do see sometimes, especially we're here in the middle of our summer vacation here in the United States, it's not unusual for people to say, hey, everybody, I'm fine, but I'm not going to be on social for a little while. I'm going to take some time for me. And just say, hey, everything's okay, but I just I'm checking out for a little while. There's nothing wrong. But I'll be back in August. I'll be back when the school year starts.
Yeah.
And I've seen that too.
So, Amy, do you think we should talk about a few of the library hashtags that people might want to include in their tweets and start following?
Shannon, what are some of the hashtags that you find yourself using frequently?
Okay, so one hashtag that I think is probably important to follow, especially because it's, I would say, the biggest and the oldest in terms of reach for specifically for school librarians, is the TL chat hashtag, and that's teacher librarian chat. It was actually originally a scheduled chat that Nikki Robertson, who I know has been a guest on the show, started, and it's no longer a scheduled chat, but people still use that hashtag to talk about things library. And so that's still a very good one, and probably the biggest one to follow within school librarian Twitter. Then you also have hashtag Future Ready Libs and hashtag ISTE Libs. And those are a little bit newer hashtags, and those relate to particularly the use of technology as it relates to library, and goes along with the Future Ready Schools movement. And then if you're talking about library Twitter, hashtag library Twitter, that actually gets a bigger amount of follow and reach than the school librarian ones, but that's because it also includes public librarians, and libraries and librarians of every shape and form, and not just the school library. So those are kind of the basic chats that I would, or not chats, the basic hashtags that I would encourage librarians to check out.
Make sure to update the it's a Google sheet that's going to be in the show notes. And anytime you find a place to connect with people, it's great. I have found, like I said, the hashtag YA Lit MG Lit and Kid Lit is really a great way to help all of us when we're reading the books that we're enjoying, and we want to not only reach out and thank those authors, but also make sure that books that we enjoy might find their way into the hands of other librarians who might be building their collections out as well. You know, Shannon, I think it is fair to say that we all gravitate towards our favorite social media platforms just out of a personal preference, because I think it really is based on what you want to share at that time and what you're hoping to achieve. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As I mentioned before, to me, Twitter is kind of my go-to, and that has to do with seeing it as a networking tool and a place where I can share and get ideas and also add my voice to important issues like we were talking about earlier. And I also, in addition to the library Twitter, am very big in EdTech Twitter as well. And so, you know, there are a lot of people to follow on EdTech Twitter and a lot of hashtags as well, of education Twitter in general, things like hashtag MakerEd for makerspaces, or hashtag EdTech, hashtag EdChat. Hashtag teacher Twitter is huge, especially compared to like library Twitter. If you think about like how many librarians there are in a school versus how many teachers there are in a school, that makes sense. But there are definitely a lot of connections that you can make just outside of the librarian circles on Twitter as well.
Absolutely. You know, recently I encountered a conversation on library Facebook to the effect, which do you prefer, Facebook or Twitter? And it was not at all surprising that the people on Facebook preferred Facebook. But I'm going to ask you, why do you like Twitter?
So it's funny that you say that, because I actually used to be in quite a few Facebook groups that were library and education related, and they became such a time suck for me that I felt like I just I couldn't do it. Like, it was taking up too much of my personal time. Like, I didn't need to be in every thread trying to help every single person. You know, I think that's the thing about librarians. We are helpful. And so when you have an issue that you want to solve, or a problem, or something you want to share, like Facebook groups can be a perfect place for that. And you were actually kind of speaking to this, Amy, before we hit record on the podcast, because of course you have your Facebook group for School Librarians United. So I really just had to like put some boundaries up for myself social media wise. And so I decided just to use Facebook for, family and personal things. And so for me with Twitter, just being able to dip my toes in the stream of Twitter when I have like 10 extra minutes, in a drive-through lane or in line at the store or something like that. Like, that's the amount of commitment I can put into Twitter and, still get something out of it. Now, if you want to like have a lot of engagement, obviously you need to do more than just, drive-through lines here and there. But that's what seems to work the best for me, and also just trying to maintain that networking. The other thing I love about Twitter is giveaways. Like, there are so many retweet to win these books, retweet, this hashtag, follow me and retweet, and you might win this. I actually did win a copy of Hacking School Libraries once, the book, by retweeting a tweet for that. So that was pretty cool. And I don't know if our guests are familiar with the hashtag clear the lists that's out around the beginning of the school year. So if you are a teacher or librarian who has an Amazon wish list or donors choose list right now, if you post with that hashtag and do some retweeting, there are people out there that you do not even know that might buy you some things for your library.
Well, and I love that you mentioned all the ways in which the social media can be used, and in this case, Twitter specifically, to really build and support the people who are working in libraries. And so you're right. When you've got the clear the list, when people have a wish list out there or a GoFundMe, being able to showcase that, because the Twitter handle, it's not your name that's going to get people to see. It's using a Twitter handle that signals to other people exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And so it is a very easy way to help somebody directly. And I found that especially in Twitter, you are going to find a more international community. You're going to, rub elbows with a lot of people from many parts of the world. And I love the translate feature, because every once in a while, I see people who are tweeting in a language other than English, and I have already admitted that I can only speak one language. And taking Latin in high school, while it might have helped me on my SATs, did not help me in any profoundly in trying to communicate with other people. But I love the translate feature, because when I see tweets that are written in other languages, all I have to hit the translate, and I can see exactly, not exact, but it's going to be a rough interpretation of what the person is saying. And I love that. I love this opportunity to engage with people outside of the United States. And I've noticed that when it comes to working on Facebook, because I will always use Facebook, and it's what you said, people are always asking for help. I want to respond to those, because all too often there's an episode that's been recorded that can help this person. There's an episode that we recorded, and I can just send you that link. And the fun thing is, and this is a problem that I'm having with Instagram, in Twitter and in Facebook, you can embed those links. So if I want to share something with you, I'm just going to put that link out there, and all of a sudden people say, "Ooh, I want to see what that is actually." And so for me, that's one of the reasons why I don't share an Instagram handle on my show, because I can't put a link on Instagram relevant to the episode that I'm putting out that day. And it's a limiting. And by the way, there's nothing very visual about being a podcaster other than the picture we took before we hit record. So
I love that you brought up global connections, and I also love, Amy, that your podcast is international. I know you've had guests from Australia and New Zealand and all over the place, and that's very cool. And I hope that one of the things that having to go remote showed us during the pandemic is it's so easy to bring people into your classroom, into your living room, or whatever the case may be, from around the country, around the world, whatever. And so, Twitter is a great way to make some global connections if you're trying to, make that possible for your students to see more than what they experience. In my case, stuck here in the middle of the country in the Midwest.
I do want to say, going back to this idea of connecting with people I'd otherwise not get to connect with, are these authors. I'm not a shy person, but the idea of walking up to an author I greatly admire is not going to happen. I just don't feel like wasting their time. But I have no problem adding their handle to anytime I'm tweeting out about a book they've written. And 9 times out of 10, these authors see an opportunity to connect directly with their readership. And if they know you're a librarian, oh my gosh, it's fantastic. I've managed to get some really fun interactions with authors of books that are in my collection, because they see, oh, this is a person who's a librarian. This is one of our gatekeepers. We want this person we're going to take the next 3 minutes to engage with a school librarian, because this person is in many cases going to then buy all the books I've ever written and make sure those are in their collection. And by God, that's exactly what I did. And it just makes my day, because these authors realize the value. I don't think they're just, oh, it's another librarian. No. I sense genuine interest in engaging with not just their readers, but the people who are making the decisions that are going to put those books on the shelf.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an excellent point to make.
And And that's not going to happen on Facebook. Forgive me. Forgive me, but for all the wonderful things that library Facebook can do. And I love including those episodes that are going to speak to the immediate needs. When I read, help everybody. Oh my gosh, I have to, I'm interviewing for this job and I don't know what to do. And you can embed those episodes that are going to provide that help, but you're not going to be rubbing elbows with a lot of those authors, at least not on a first name basis. And it's something I can't get over. Sometimes I'm like, it just made my day. I just like fangirling about somebody who I reached out to and they reached back to me and I was like, ah.
Yeah. And you're helping them out too, so it's definitely mutually beneficial.
Shannon, I love to learn, what are some of the tips and tricks, in the words of our listener who requested this episode? How do you manage Twitter and how do you build up your Twitter presence?
Yeah, I would be happy to share some tips. I've got 7 tips for you. So I've been on Twitter since 2012, and I have just under 2,000 followers and follow just under 2,000 people. And so my first tip is about your profile and being very thoughtful about that. And you've already talked about that a little bit, Amy. I think, being very specific in your description and what you choose to include, thinking about, who you want to show who you are. When you follow someone and they need to decide whether to follow you back or not, like they're probably going to look quickly at your profile and see who else follows them that I know and what is it they're interested in. And so that, and thinking about like, what do I want my pinned tweet to be about? Because you can pin one tweet to your profile. Those are important. And also just thinking about like your social media rules that your district has and understanding what those are. The district that I work for now has pretty strong social media rules for their teachers in terms of like tweeting out things that the students are doing. So I do have to be careful about that. They would prefer that I retweet the district social media when it comes to that. But I can share out, personal things that I find and do through the library that are helpful. And, some schools, they're okay with you posting student pictures as long as you, have the smiley face over the kid's face. And, so I think making sure you understand kind of just the basics from the profile and the rules and restrictions kind of working forward. So that's my first tip. I've got a few tips for you in terms of managing your Twitter feed. So one thing that you may not be aware of is that Twitter changed the way that your feed is set up. And so it used to be that you would see the latest tweets that people had tweeted, and then they changed it a couple of years back to the home feed you have is based on relevance. And so that goes to a Twitter algorithm that decides things like the number of followers and the number of engagements that people have and the topics that you're interested in and people you've interacted with before. And so you may not, necessarily see everything that you want to see based in your home feed. And so, but you can actually pretty quickly switch back to that latest tweets if you want to. There's a star button that's right there on the home feed screen at the top right, usually, where you can click it and switch to the latest tweets. And that's often what I'll do if I just have a little bit of time to scroll and look. Another thing that's helpful but it's kind of hidden, is people can create lists in Twitter. And I've created several lists, 2 of them that I think might be of particular interest to the School Library United podcast listeners are my Library Thought Leaders list and my, which Amy is on, by the way, and also my Future Ready Libs list, which got about 900 librarians on it who were on the Future Ready Libs Facebook group that wanted to connect on Twitter as well. And so I put together those lists because it's easy to click to view a list and then just click follow for all the people that you want to follow instead of having to look up each person's Twitter ID individually to follow them.
And can I ask you, just would you just like walk through, like if I wanted to create a list, I mean, would you mind telling us walk us through, like, how would you go about doing that?
Sure. So from your profile, if you were going to create a list, there is actually a list category, and you can create a new list, and then you can start adding people to that list. And sometimes it'll even suggest people to add. And so if you're on someone else's profile and you want to add them to a list you've created, or even start a new list and add them to it, you can go to the little 3 dots that's by their name in the top of their profile, and you can click add or remove from list. And then you can also, if you want to see if they have any lists that you want to follow, you can click view lists to see their lists that they've created. When you create a list, you have to decide if you want it to be private or public. And so if it's private, only you will see the list members. And so the people that you follow even and put on the list won't even know. But when you do put someone on a public list, then it is viewable to anyone that can see your profile.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. And again, you know, we curate. Librarians, we're always about curating. And so by creating that list, it's in effect trying to create this work once so that we can benefit from it in the future. I've noticed that especially, I know that you can set an alert. I mean, you can, with certain individuals you'd like to follow, you can actually, you know, have it so Twitter alerts you when they've tweeted something. And for me, I think that's really fun because I fangirl all the time, and I want to, you know, sometimes I want to see what's going on with somebody. And is it stalkerish? Not really. Not really.
So, Amy, it's funny because at the top of this, you said you didn't know much about Twitter, but you actually just taught me something new because I did not realize I could set an alert for specific people to see their tweets.
Yeah. And I will say sometimes it's just a temporary thing because, you know, there's a topic that I'm really interested about or they're sort of, you know, all the things that they're putting out there is really fantastic. And I do follow some people who are amazing at sharing. And if I can just throw out a something that for me has always worked is by, if you happen to create content, whether it's an image, whether it's a file, and if you create something that you don't mind sharing with the library Twitter people, you will find yourself with followers. Because if you put out something into the world and you know, for me, I create the podcast, and every once in a while I put something out there that's a quick little video or a little meme that I've used with some success in my space. Those images really do, and especially if you don't mind sending out that file, if you share that file and somebody can then use that file, I know that it really does make a difference to people who are looking for resources on social media. And I'm going to throw out one more thing about our bio. Friends, if you want to grow Twitter followers in library, have the word library or librarian somewhere in your bio. Because to me, if what's important about you is in your bio and never once the word library comes up in there or librarian, you know, sometimes it's a media specialist. I know what that means, media specialist. But I do look for the word library or librarian because I love following people on social media for whom this profession is part of who they are. And so I do look for that in Twitter when I look to follow people.
Yeah, and actually you can put one of the library hashtags in your profile. I've done that, and so when anybody searches Future Ready Lives hashtag, one of the categories that will come up under the search is people, and you'll see me listed there as well as anyone else who's decided to put it in their profile.
I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, I was always wondering why people were putting hashtags in their bio, and now I know. See, learning all the time. This is fantastic.
Yeah. So feel free to add some of those to your bio, and you will show up in searches of the people who have that hashtag. My next tip, actually one more thing I wanted to mention about managing your Twitter feed. So as you're finding these great ideas that you want to save, one of the things that you may not realize is there is actually a bookmarking tool in Twitter. So of course you can like a tweet and always go back and look at your likes, but you might like something that just because it's, something you like and not necessarily something you need to go back and find again. If you bookmark it, then it's easier to find. And so the bookmarking button is kind of hidden under the share button. So if you click the share button on a tweet, then one of the options will be to add to bookmarks. And then that way you can actually have some bookmarks. Now, if you pay for premium Twitter, you can actually put them into folders and stuff. I don't personally pay for Twitter Blue. I use an extension instead that helps me organize my bookmark. And we can talk more about that in a little bit.
We definitely need to revisit that because everything you just said made absolutely no sense to me. So absolutely, yes, let's revisit that. Yeah, Twitter Blue, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so you can pay $2.99 a month for Twitter Blue, and you can get some extra features. And one of the extra features you get is that you can organize your bookmarks. But if you don't want to pay for it, there are other ways you can organize the bookmarks that are free. So I always look for free things as a. And
tell me again how you bookmark. Is it you're just bookmarking the tweet?
Yeah. So if you're bookmarking the tweet, not the person. So whichever tweet you want to save, say if someone has a great idea and you want to go back to that tweet later to look at it or follow their link that they gave you, whatever it is, if you click the share button, which is, the little share icon, one of the choices will be to add to bookmarks.
There you go. Awesome. Again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. So a few tips then that relate to when you are tweeting. So if you follow social media marketers, they will actually tell you, if you're trying to build a brand on Twitter, that you need to be posting 2 to 7 times a day to be able to get your reach and your engagement generating. So I don't know if every librarian has time to do that. I definitely don't. But you can actually schedule tweets with a product like Hootsuite is something you can use to schedule tweets, and that's a freemium product. And so just using it with your Twitter account, you could, if Sunday night is one of the things you do is schedule the tweets that you're going to tweet out that week, you could do that and kind of just do it all in one block instead of trying to find 2 to 7 times through your day to get on Twitter and tweet.
And forgive me, Hootsuite is an app that you can add to your phone.
Yes, so it's a website and it's an app. I prefer to use it on a laptop rather than on my phone because one of the cool things that it does, in addition to letting you schedule your tweets, is you can look at several Twitter streams at once, with hashtags, and you could look at your tweets, hashtags tweets all at once in several different streams. So that's one of the reasons why I like to use Hootsuite.
Okay, very, very cool. And you said Dewey?
Yeah, so Dewey is the extension that will let you organize your bookmarks. So if you get Dewey is a Chrome extension. Of course, as a librarian, I love the name. But it lets you organize your bookmarks. And so it actually grabs your bookmarks from Twitter into Dewey, and then you can tag them. And then you can also do searches once you have everything tagged and organized. So if you don't want to pay for Twitter Blue, but you do want to have a way to organize your bookmarks, then that's definitely a good option. And for anyone who's already using Wakelet, you can actually save a tweet to Wakelet and add it to your collection. So that's a way that you could organize the things that you want to save from Twitter as well. I have a Wakelet account, but I haven't done much with it yet. So to me, the Dewey extension, kind of does what I need for it to do with keeping track of my bookmarks on Twitter.
Yeah. I did hear, and I haven't used this firsthand, but I know that Wakelet, if you want to isolate a hashtag, it will embed that hashtag into a wakelet so that you can access it and the activity that's following that hashtag. And so it's very fun.
So you can do that, and you can also save individual tweets that you want to keep track of as well. So if there are, if you're gathering ideas for a particular topic that you're getting ready to teach, or that an activity that you want to try, you could also save it that way.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah.
My last piece of advice for when you're actually tweeting is, you can, of course, use hashtags, but you can try doing a search for the topic before you actually post, just to see what conversation is already happening. That might clue you into some hashtags to use, or you may even choose to reply or retweet something that's already happening as a conversation about that topic. So if you go to your Twitter search, you can search all of Twitter, and then that will bring in, results from anyone that's tweeting about your topic, and you can just put in a word. It doesn't have to have a hashtag with it. Or you actually have the option of filtering your search just to include the people you're following. So if you want to find out if any of the people you're following are talking about a particular topic or have tweeted on a particular topic, you could put that in your search bar and then filter your search to just the people that you follow.
And that's on which platform?
So that's just on Twitter. If you do that from a laptop in particular, then you can use the filtering of your search to the people that you follow. But even on your mobile phone, you can search any topic that you might be interested in just by hitting that search icon on your Twitter app. And so, before you just start tweeting, you might actually, we're librarians, we know about research. You can research on Twitter as well and see what conversation is already happening around that topic that maybe you can add to and join in on, rather than just kind of tweeting and hoping somebody that follows you sees your tweet and helps you.
Right. Well, and, I said that if you're a content creator, XYZ, but let's be fair, we encounter a great deal of information in what we do every day, and much of that information has a relevant hashtag or Twitter handle. And it's not unusual when I'm doing research or I'm putting together resources that the resources or what I'm taking a look at on the internet has you can just tweet out where you are. And if I found it helpful that day to come across this information because I'm working on something, there's a possibility that somebody who might encounter it on Twitter would also find it valuable. And it's not unusual. I try to do that often, that if I'm reading something for work and I'm trying to work on a program that I think is going to help me, I might then just take that extra step and tweet it out and say, I'm working on this project right now, and I can't believe all these great resources I just found. And you never know, that information reaches people who are also out there on library Twitter and appreciate it because, I didn't write the article. That's not going to happen. But I did find that if this is quality that I'm going to use, there's a good possibility somebody would appreciate me sharing that out.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And, that actually leads into my next tip, which is when you decide you want to retweet something, if you click and choose quote tweet instead of just the retweet, then you can add something to the conversation and you can add some value to it. And it will also increase your reach. So if what you're looking to do is to, expand your PLN, the more that you get your tweets out there, the better. And so you can actually, add value to it by adding hashtags, adding your own ideas, adding your own resources, even just chiming in sometimes. And, sometimes the person that tweeted has a bigger following than you. They like what you had to say and they will hit retweet. And there, all of a sudden, your tweet has gone out to their followers and not just your followers. So I would definitely, occasionally I'll retweet things just because, I agree with it and I'm not going to take the time. But if it's something that you feel passionate about or that you can add value to, that's really a way to start increasing your reach on Twitter.
Well, and commenting on things that are generating buzz is fun. And that is a conversation. And I love when something is happening in library Twitter and I see, a couple people have responded and I have some feelings about this. You know what? Be part of the conversation. Don't just lurk. Because you're being very casual. You're not engaging. But if you want to engage in that conversation, be, intentional in what you say, be thoughtful in what you say, because, trust me that there are people who are going to look at how you respond and form some opinions about that. And you may find that you are amongst friends and you are sharing, like opinions. And you may also find very quickly that not everybody agrees with what you have to say.
Yeah, going back to that analogy of networking in real life, if you're just lurking on Twitter, it's like you're the wallflower that came and didn't take the time to talk to anybody. And if you hit that retweet button, that's like, you're like putting your fist up like, yeah, I agree, or clapping along. But if you take the time to retweet with a quote where you're adding your own voice to the conversation, then you are actually engaging in that networking and engaging in a conversation.
Well, and friends, I've been saying it for now 4 years. We share the social media of the guests who join this podcast because they're incredibly generous. They have a sharing spirit and they believe that we're always #BetterTogether when we support one another, which is why we always end every episode with our guests sharing their social media. And I want you to realize my virtual PLN has been the beneficiary of it has been created by every episode that's ever come out, because everybody who's ever been on my show, I have incorporated their social media into the social media that I use, and my experience on these platforms is that much more enhanced because I'm getting all of those that feedback and those thoughtful contributions from people whose opinions I value. Shannon and I have just met, I would call this in person. Virtually, we are now collaborators, but I have a much better appreciation for her practice and for her dedication to her craft. And I would be far more likely to engage with her on social because of this episode, because we have had an opportunity to exchange ideas. And so again, which is why when we do an episode, every time I say, hey, would you please share your social media so others can find you? I'm doing that for a reason. So, Shannon, you've been an absolute delight. Would you please share with us your social media handle so we can find you?
Of course. It is at Shannon Steimel, my first and last name. And, I can say as a listener of the podcast, I have definitely followed people that I've met through you, Amy. And so I'm excited to see what this new level of exposure by being a contributor to your podcast will bring. So please follow me.
Absolutely. And it is fun because when other school librarians follow you, there's a very good chance it's because they heard your episode. And you're like, oh, that's so cool. And friends, by the way, I encourage, if you hear something on an episode that really resonates with you, make sure you include the handle of the guest, because whenever I put content out that has a guest, and they always have guests, I make sure to include them in the handle so that you can see this was a collaborative effort. This is, and you should know when people are talking about the episodes you created.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. Yeah. And, don't be afraid to ask people to retweet for you, too. That is actually Twitter etiquette to say, please RT means please retweet. And you can, tag people that you want to help get the word out. That's actually one of the things I loved going back to being an English teacher is NCTE is really good about doing that and, retweeting. And so this is a shout out to AASL to get on it because you do some amazing things for us, but I would like to see you come up with a hashtag like #NCTE Village and start retweeting for your librarians that have a question and need help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Friend Shannon Steimel, I'm so grateful you took some time out of this day to share what you know about being on #Library Twitter. I wish you a wonderful rest of the summer and a fantastic school year. Thanks, Amy. You too. Thank Thank you so much to Shannon for sharing all of her expertise with us. Make sure that you check out the great resources which she included in our show notes, including the open resource Google Sheet. It's an editable Google Sheet, in which case you can add your own Twitter hashtags and handles and build out your own Twitter PLN. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider sharing a little fan mail with Shannon on Twitter, for that matter. One last friendly reminder, friends, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be National Board Certified Librarian and my conversation with Melissa Gergen and Stephanie Wilson. I hope you will tune in.